Welcome everyone to Three Gals in a Mixing Bowl. I'm Hannah.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Jessie.
And today we have a fun video for you of how to make roasted tomatoes. So about this time of year, everybody's garden is overflowing with tomatoes and you can hardly give them away. And so we wanted to share with you a timely video on a way that we enjoy eating tomatoes.
What's funny about this is I know a lot of people really like tomatoes, but ironically, I'm one of those few people who don't really care about tomatoes. I remember growing up, we would have tomato soup a lot, and I didn't like it at all. But this recipe is actually really good. I love this recipe, which is so surprising to me because I don't really care about tomatoes. So this is definitely one of my favorites.
I love tomatoes in general. My mom and I have always been the tomato connoisseurs. Every summer we eat tomatoes and with salt and pepper or tomato soup. We like to put her through agony, and not too much though, but love tomatoes.
And my family loves tomatoes as well. My grandma actually was the one who discovered this recipe, and she shared it with us, and we tried it and we loved it. They're like candy. Once you make them, it's hard to save any. We want to eat them all at the pan. So keep watching to learn more about how to make this great recipe that we're sure that you'll love. So the first thing that you'll need to do is gather your ingredients together so that you have everything together. You're going to need just 4 basic ingredients, and we thought that we'd show you today the different brands that we're going to be using. We aren't paid to talk about these, but we wanted to share them in case they're helpful, and as always, make sure to check it for your food allergies before using it. The first thing that you'll need, obviously, is some tomatoes. I'm using a mixture of pear tomatoes and cherry tomatoes. How about you, Sarah and Jessie?
We are using just some cherry tomatoes that we got from a local food stand down our street.
Perfect. Then you're going to need 3 other ingredients. You're going to need olive oil. This is going to help them to roast properly. I'm using the Bragg's organic olive oil. We've liked that one, and it's worked well for our family.
And we are using the Trader Joe's Giotto's imported olive oil right here. We like this one because it doesn't have a super strong taste, but it's a nice one.
Very good. Then you're going to need some garlic powder. I'm using the Simply Organic garlic powder. And we like this brand because a lot of theirs have been gluten-free. A lot of spices, they'll stick gluten or wheat flour into the actual spice, so that way it keeps it from caking. So whatever spice you use, if you're going gluten-free, make sure to check that to make sure that you won't have any hidden surprises that you weren't counting on.
And we just use the Trader Joe's garlic powder, and that one has been good. We haven't found any sensitivities towards that one.
Very good. And the last thing you'll need is just salt. So we use the Redmond's real salt. We like the flavor. It works great. You can use either the coarse or the fine ground, whichever one works.
Yep, and we've been using the Himalayan sea salt, and we put it in this little grinder. Sometimes we have the fine ground, and right now we just have the coarse ground.
First step in making this will be to start chopping the pear tomatoes. So you'll want to chop them, instead of cutting them like the width, you'll want to cut them long ways, so that way you get that perfect roasting, so that it's not too tomatoey on one side and burnt on the other. So make sure to just cut it longwise. And you'll want to cut through all of your tomatoes. For the amount of tomatoes you'll want to use, it really depends on the size of your pan and how many you want to use. My family, we like to put them in like strawberry containers. And that's a good way for us to kind of measure, and it's just nice for harvesting. So we'll put them in there, and then I usually use about 2 of those for each batch. But mostly it'll just be the size of your pan, and if you end up having more than 1 pan's worth, you won't regret it. You can just make a second batch, and it'll probably get eaten up the same night too. So
very true.
It will. These do not last long.
Definitely. So on to the chopping.
As we begin chopping up our tomatoes, I wanted to introduce you to a little nutrition tidbit that I got to learn through my nutrition certification course that I did recently. And that is a way to tell how your olive oil is real. Because sometimes olive oil can become rancid once it's on the shelves for a while, or it can expire, or sometimes your olive oil actually will be mixed in with another oil such as soy oil or canola oil to make it cheaper, and you definitely don't want that. And it doesn't have to be on the label, but that companies have to market that. So one way to tell if your olive oil is real is to stick it in the fridge. And if you wait a couple hours, then you can check on it, and if it is starting to get a little bit solid, then you know that it is a real olive oil. So it shouldn't become completely solid like coconut oil, but it should become a little bit thicker and it won't be as thin. So that's your little tip of the day. Put your olive oil in the fridge. That's my little challenge for you, and see what happens.
So once you've gone ahead and you've chopped up all your tomatoes, then your next step will be getting them to start marinating. So what you'll want to do is take your garlic powder, and to be honest, I never really measure this when I do it. I usually just go by sight. You'll want at least a tablespoon, depending on how many tomatoes you have, but you'll definitely want a lot. And as we were talking, our theory with garlic is you really can't use too much. So just go ahead and be very liberal with the garlic, and go ahead and just sprinkle that on first. You'll want the top to be like almost completely dusted with garlic. I mean, you don't want a thick layer, but you definitely want to be able to see the garlic and have a good amount. So that's about the amount of garlic that I usually put. You can kind of see a little bit in the light about how much garlic that is. I'd say I'd probably put it anywhere from a tablespoon to 2 to 3. So definitely load up on the garlic. Then the next part that you'll want is your salt. For this, I usually put about a teaspoon, maybe up to 2 teaspoons, depending on the size. So you just want a good amount. You want it to be where there's enough that'll go down below, so that way all the tomatoes get enough salt. But you don't want too many, because too salty doesn't taste the greatest. So I'd say about a teaspoon to 2 teaspoons. And then once you've done that, what you want to do is grab your olive oil, and you're going to want to dump on about a half a cup to 2/3, 3/4 of a cup, depending on your amount of tomatoes. For this amount, I would say I use generally about half a cup, if not a little bit more. So basically you want it to where the tomatoes will sit in the olive oil. You don't need it full, obviously, but just enough to where it helps the garlic to start seeping into the tomatoes. So usually I just drizzle it on about that much. That might be a little more than I usually do, but it won't hurt it. And then once you put in your olive oil, you'll want to let it sit for anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes. The longer it sits, the more flavor you're going to have. So let it sit, set it aside. You can leave it on the counter and just let it sit until it's kind of gotten some of that flavor in. So you can get that nice garlic roasted flavor. And putting the tomatoes out after you've let them sit is to use some parchment paper and put that over whatever pan you're using. I'm using a stone, and Sarah and Jesse are going to be using a metal baking pan. And the important thing with the parchment paper is to make sure to put it down before you do the tomatoes. Because while it might seem like it would be okay without parchment paper, the parchment paper really cuts down on the mess, because the tomatoes can get very messy as they're roasting, and it makes cleanup so much easier. So definitely don't skip the parchment paper step. And then what you'll want to do is just take out your tomatoes. I don't like to put the olive oil on the tomatoes when they're roasting. The reason is that it takes them forever to roast, because it's got to cook through all of that liquid. So just pull them out, make sure to lay them down skin side down. Put that on the paper, and then just spread it out. It's okay if they touch a little bit, but don't try to make it to where they don't touch too much. Once you've got all your tomatoes laid out on your pan, then go ahead and slide it into the oven. You'll want the oven to be at 350 degrees. The highest I would suggest going is 375 since you are working with olive oil. So make sure not to go too high with that temperature there. So stick with 350, 375. The time for it to take, it varies by the pan. If you're cooking on a metal pan, it generally can take up to an hour. If you're cooking on a stone, then it could take 40 minutes, 30 minutes. It really depends. And it really depends ultimately on your tomatoes. So what you're looking for is for them not to look like they're juicy anymore. There's still some juice, but you're not, like, it has definitely deflated, for lack of a better word, into looking like it's more roasted. So look for that to know when they're done. Once you've pulled it out of the oven, make sure to not leave the tomatoes on there for too long as they can burn, which is super disappointing. So make sure to watch out for that. One thing that my family does, is a little tip, is we just take the parchment paper and we just slide it onto a glass plate or something like that to where it can still cool, but it's not still cooking on the pan. Another plug for using the parchment paper. So make sure to do that and then let them cool a little bit before you sample, because they'll be very hot when they come out of the oven.
These tomatoes are really good with any kind of Italian type of dish. It's also good as just a side or even just by itself.
If it lasts that long to be put into another dish. It's our experience that these tomatoes are so delicious that they're usually eaten fairly quickly coming out of the oven. So I hope this video has inspired you to go out and try this delicious, simple, easy recipe with these tomatoes so you can enjoy them. If you did like this video, please click the like button down here. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button so you are alerted every time we upload a new video. Also, let us know in the comments down below if you tried out this recipe and tell us what you thought about it.
And we'll see you next time with another yummy video.